It was members of the House of Representatives that returned to Washington after nearly 8 weeks out of session and 43 days after the government shutdown began to vote on legislation to ultimately end the shutdown earlier this week. The House voted 222 to 209 on Wednesday night. This approved that funding bill to reopen the government and passed the measure over to the desk of President Trump, who signed the bill into law. So, of course, we know that while both parties primarily voted as expected, there were a few who broke from party lines. Let's take a look at this. This is the list that we have there of the Democrats who decided to vote not on their party lines. As you can see, Representative Don Davis there from North Carolina and several others there on the list as well. And so talking about the Republicans on that side, putting this up on your screen, this is, of course, Representative Thomas Massie, the Republican from Kentucky, as well as Representative Greg Steube from Florida. And so let's go ahead and speak to him here, as Representative Steube is now with us on Live Now from Fox. Representative, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start with the very basics. Of course, it made headlines yesterday when you, along with Thomas Massie, decided not to vote in favor of the CR that was ultimately signed by President Trump. Can you sort of talk to us about some of the thought process behind that decision?
Yeah, I think it was absolutely atrocious that the senators would put a self-dealing provision and create a legal cause of action for specifically 8 senators to be able to sue the Department of Justice and be awarded $500,000 per occurrence. So it could be millions of dollars for 8 senators that they shoved in a CR plus 3 appropriations bill, a mini bus like we call it, and then send it over to the House and expect all of the House to either eat it or to vote no and obviously send the bill back to the Senate. What I had hoped was going to occur, that the Speaker would strip that provision off, which numerous conservatives have said is absolutely inappropriate, and send the bill back to the Senate so we wouldn't have to deal with it. Instead, they put us all on the board on voting to award 8 senators $500,000 per occurrence on a new legal cause of action that they specifically would be able to bring against the Department of Justice, or vote against, obviously, the continuing resolution with the 3 appropriation bills.
And Representative Steube, for folks at home who don't have context to this, I'm going to provide it for them now. What you're kind of referring to is the Arctic frost probe. And so the phone records of 8 Republican senators were subpoenaed without notice. This is by former special counsel Jack Smith during the Biden administration. This was in his investigation into the January 6th riot that happened on Capitol Hill. And so some of the senators, as you just mentioned, who did have their phone records assessed were Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina, who you've been very outspoken about. And this is up there on the screen as well. This is so folks can actually see what that provision is that you all had to make a decision on. I'm also going to put this up. You just mentioned House Speaker Mike Johnson did refer to this. He said on his X account that House Republicans are introducing standalone legislation, this to repeal the provision that was included by the Senate in the government funding bill. We're putting this legislation on the fast track suspension calendar for the House for next week. And so with the House Speaker speaking out ahead of this vote, what still was the hesitation within you that didn't allow you to move forward, as others in your party, such as the representative from Texas, Chip Roy, said that he had a problem with it, but was looking forward to this vote that's going to instead happen next week?
Yeah, well, this vote next week doesn't repeal the provision, because the provision that was part of the package was signed by the president last night and is now law. This standalone bill has to pass the House and then go to the Senate, the very body that put that language in and send it to us, and has to go to the Senate to pass. And I don't see Leader Thune, who put that language in the package that was voted on last night, taking up a standalone bill to specifically change language that is now current law. I just don't see that happening. There's no guarantee that that happens. The guarantee would have been to strip it out last night and send the bill back to the Senate, but unfortunately our Speaker decided not to take that course of action.
And so with that being the case, Solo, putting up your statement as well that you put on your X account in the aftermath of that vote, I have to ask you, Representative Steube, to kind of pivot here from some of what held you back from voting for the bill. Was there anything in there that you saw was positive for the country and those in your district as well?
Well, it's obviously positive to get the government back open. The House voted on a continuing resolution, a clean continuing resolution that didn't have all these things in it, didn't have 3 appropriations bills that had never been considered in the House, shoved in a minibus on top of a CR. We passed that back in September, and then the Senate shut the government down by failing to pass a clean CR that the House sent to them in September. And then we were forced to either vote up or down on this huge package that came to us last night. 3 individual appropriations bills that actually spends more money than what the House had passed in committee and what the president even requested in these different provisions. We are also passing a CR that is Pelosi and Schumer level spending levels from the COVID era. We're going to be dealing with this again in January because it was a short-term CR, and the other provisions that were passed without the House involvement in it that was simply added on and sent to the House are going to expire in September, right before the midterm elections. So you don't think that the Democrats are going to use this to their advantage in the appropriations process in January, where the new CR date is, and in September, right before the midterms?
All right. And so, of course, we know that that's not the only amount, everything that we're looking forward to. Putting this up on the screen as well there. This is a live look that we have there of Capitol Hill. And so there's more business as usual after this, Representative Steube, as the government is now reopened. And one of the other things that we're looking ahead to, putting this up from the Washington Examiner, they're reporting on Speaker Johnson saying that the House would vote on the release of the documents related to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein next week. Of course, we know that during this entire President Trump's second presidency, this had been hanging over his head in the administration. So with that vote coming ahead, what are your thoughts ahead of it? Do you have a position on how you plan to vote next week?
Yeah, we have the most transparent administration in history right now, who have given a treasure trove of information to the American public as it relates to the Epstein files. You have the House Oversight Committee that has also released a ton of information. The discharge petition is going to come before the House next week. I intend to support it. The American people want transparency. The people in my district want transparency, and I'll move through the process. I suspect you'll probably have quite a few Republicans that will vote to support that bill to move it to the Senate.
And so it'll also be something that we're following here on Live Now from Fox as that debate gets underway. And lastly, before I let you go here, Representative, that bipartisan deal that we were just speaking about, the funding lapse, included just a long-term agreement on 3 of more than a dozen bills that lawmakers need to finish before the year ends in order to keep the cash flowing on some of those federal programs. Many people, though, who were impacted by this government shutdown are worried that on January 30th, when this continuing resolution that President Trump signed into law is done, that we could potentially face the idea of going into yet another government shutdown. What are your thoughts on that? Where do you stand? And what words do you have for some of those who were affected by this current one?
Yeah, they should be worried. That's why I've repeatedly called on the Senate to do away with the filibuster so they don't have to go to the Democrats and get 7 or 8 votes to fund the federal government. The American people gave Republicans the House, the Senate, and the White House. Why in the world should we have to go and negotiate with Chuck Schumer just to simply fund the government? And so the CR only funds it, as you said, to the end of January. So we could very likely be in another circumstance where the House passes bills like we have in the past. They go to the Senate, and because they require 60 votes to get over the filibuster in the Senate, if Chuck Schumer doesn't like what's going on and doesn't like the bills, they're going to shut the government down again, which is why I've repeatedly called on Senator Thune to kill the filibuster as it relates to funding the federal government. It's the only basic function constitutionally required of the Congress. It shouldn't take 60 votes in the Senate to get it done.
All right, that's something that we'll continue to follow here on Live Now from Fox. Representative Steube, we appreciate you for joining us. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.